Hello and welcome to How We've Made It in Africa. This is the road less traveled with me, Adetunji Omotola. And joining me today is Apiwe Nxusani-Mawela, the Chief Executive Officer of Brewsters Craft, a company she formed in 2015. It is a microbrewery which provides beer quality testing services, and they're also into contract manufacturing. And in 2019, the brewery was actually physically established. And in 2020, Apiwe launched the Tolokazi brand, under which she creates beer and cider. Welcome to How We Made It in Africa, Apiwe.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Apiwe, can you give us a brief overview of what Brewsters Craft does?
So Brewsters Craft is a company I started in 2015. So a brewster is a term that is used for a female brewer. So if you Google female brewers, a brewster as a term will come up among other terms. So for me, the company was about celebrating women within the beer space. And if you look at our logo, you can see that it's an African woman who's holding a calabash on her head. So for me, the brand was about celebrating not only women in general, but women in the African context. And paying homage to the female brewers. Obviously, as women in Africa, we've been brewing beer for centuries. So the company, when I started in 2015, I focused on training and consulting because my background was I used to work for SAB, and I saw a gap within the craft beer industry, which was at that time in an exponential growth phases in the country. And I saw there was a gap when it came to training and consulting. I helped different brands create recipes and launch into the market. But then there was always also a gap in terms of a physical brewery where these brands could exist. And that's where the idea then to actually put together a brewery as part of the Brewsters Craft offering came about. And we opened up our brewery in 2019, which is based in Roodepoort in Johannesburg, where we offer contract manufacturing for a wide range of different brands. I think probably 80%, 90% of my clients are township-based young entrepreneurs who all want to play within the beer industry. And then I launched my own brand after many years of being asked when are you launching your own brand? So I finally launched my own brand last year, just before COVID.
Now tell us about the early days of the company. How did you start out? I mean, how did you sign up your first customers?
So the early days for me were actually not, to be honest with you, not that difficult. I think when I started after leaving SAP, I actually joined a group of other entrepreneurs who wanted to set up a brewery. So there was 5 of us. So I didn't have I think comparing then to now, having to start my own physical brewery, things were a little bit easier because I had people who were carrying most of the load. My only focus was around the actual physical brewing and the brewery. There was someone taking care of finances, someone was taking care of marketing. And at that time, launching the training, consulting, I think things were not easy, but we're not as difficult as I probably would have imagined. I think for me, what also helped was the fact that I came out of reputable brewing company. So I was already a qualified brewmaster. So I carried a bit of that with me where people, I would say, took note what I was saying, and they appreciated the whatever consulting service I was offering. So yeah, things were not that difficult. But I mean, as you get into the industry, what made it difficult for me to a certain extent was the fact that I'm Black and female. So I did get a lot of that negative coming from people in general. But what I found was that people that knew me and have been part of my journey actually were very receptive compared to people who did not necessarily know who I was or what I did or what my background was, where they just thought, who's this Black child who's just trying to act as if they know all these things. So it was a bit of mixed, but I, like compared to hearing other people's stories, to be honest with you, sometimes you realize that you had it a little bit easier than how some people have had a lot to deal with.
Mm. How did you finance your business, Apiwe? Tell us.
So when I started after leaving SAB, I think for me, one of the fortunate things I had, I mean, I always tell people that I know as Black people, we tend not to want to be called privileged, and we sometimes feel it's white people are the ones who are privileged. And I do believe that there is a Black privilege, there is that concept. And I feel personally, I was quite privileged in the sense that growing up, I mean, my parents were both teachers. They afforded me the opportunity to go to a private school, which meant I could go to do microbiology, which a lot of people, young kids in my village, were not obviously exposed to. That helped me when I was at SAB. By the time I left, I had built a bit of a credit record where I think I was in a comfortable state. I was not wealthy. I don't come from a wealthy family, but it meant that when I left, I started the other brewery, I had some monies coming out of SAB that I could use to finance my other business. And then to set up the brewery, I did struggle a bit looking for investors, even though, I mean, I had built a good, I would say, good credit, a good record in terms of being known in the industry and having proven myself already. But you still had that question mark hanging over your head. That like, do you really know what you're doing? So in terms of private money, I struggled to convince people to finance my brewery, until I got into, I mean, I went through some of the government entities within South Africa, and I think your other question is that some of the challenges that we face, that our government does not fund a lot of especially our industry. So I did, after a year of back and forth and applications and submitting this and that and the other, I finally got my funding loan through the IDC, which I did, which is it's one of the development banks within the country. So ideally, obviously, I would have wanted some sort of a grant, but it was all a loan, which obviously means that one has to be paying back that money, which becomes a bit of a difficulty, especially with the alcohol bans that we've had in the country.
Mm. You've given us a sense of the early days, but how did you overcome? I mean, what was exactly your biggest challenge, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest challenge for me, I mean, apart from COVID, I think COVID is a challenge on its own that we will tackle as a different topic. For me, the biggest challenge was getting financed. I think I had this great idea on paper, and everybody I spoke to thought it was a brilliant idea, that I didn't understand how nobody's funding it, that it solved so many challenges that we have in the country. I was ticking so many boxes in terms of, I mean, industrial, you ticking women empowerment, you ticking agro-processing, you ticking manufacturing, you ticking, I mean, we're looking at exports, we're looking at, so it was the business plan in itself was addressing a lot of the current issues that I think are in the forefront in the development and of the country as a whole. But my biggest challenge was obviously convincing the entities and the powers that be that, you know what, it makes sense on paper and it will make sense in reality, where a lot of the entities that are approached within the country, I mean, I was told they don't fund alcohol, the industry as a whole, that we are a sin industry, even though we're creating all these jobs, we are contributing to the GDP, we are, you know, all these other add-ons that as an industry we bring to the table, but because the product as on its own has a negative connotations, that a lot of the entities were actually against funding my business. So that was, I think, for me, one of the biggest challenges, and having to go through, I mean, I spent over a year just knocking on doors and trying to convince this person and that person. And even when I got to submit my application at the IDC, presenting my idea, having the initial go ahead from the initial committee to say, you know what, this makes business sense. Therefore, from then going to the next phase, because most of these, obviously, as you know, most of the entities will have different phases within their funding process, having to convince each committee and each committee. There was a point where I was like, you know what, maybe this is just not it. Maybe I should go look for something else to do. But I think for me, the perseverance and just believing in what I was building and just continued pushing on did pay off at the end.
Now here you are, Apiwe, you launched the Tolokazi brand for your beers and ciders in 2020. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the government now bans the sale of alcohol. How were you able to cope with that?
It was tough, I won't lie to you. The analogy I always give to people is, it's like as a mother, when you have been, because for me, for a very long time, when I built the business, it was about contract manufacturing, that I wanted to create a platform where other brands could exist and grow. The idea for me was to create the next generation of Charles glasses of this world, of obviously African Charles glasses. And I always had that in my mind. And the idea of having my own brand was there, but it was not like something I entertained a lot. And I always say to people, it's like as a mother or as a young girl growing up, and your sisters have kids, and you tell yourself, I love my sister's kids as my own. I don't really need to have my own kids. And then there's the time in a person's life where you actually conceive a child, and as a child grows in you, you actually fall in love with that child. And for me, that was like that way when the idea of my own brand started really taking shape. I was like, you know what, why didn't I do this earlier? And as a baby, for a baby, as a mother, when you have a child, as you give birth and you obviously have complications, and then they tell you the child is in ICU, it's touch and go. For me, that was COVID, where I have been nursing this child inside of me, and a time came for me to show it to the world, and launch the brand. And COVID happened, where now it's like, it's critical. It's a critical condition. I want this child to survive, because for a very long time, I've had 9 months as a mother to carry this child, and I can't not make sure this child survives Earth and becomes the best they can be. And for me, COVID was like that way. I mean, it took time and effort and everything else to build this brand and bring it to life. And then to have, I mean, we had 3 different incidents of alcohol bans, which were in total 5 months, where when we opened I launched the brand in May on social media. We opened up in June. I started selling. We were closed again in July. Then I started again when we opened. And each time I was like, you know what, I need to push. And I did a lot of different ways to try make sure this child actually makes it to full term. And each alcohol ban to me was like taking the child back to ICU and having doctors trying to save this child. But it was all emotional, I won't lie to you. It was all nerve-wracking, a mixture of different emotions. And for me, the key thing was, I need to make this work. This has to work. There's no choice but for it to work. Being the first Black to own a brewery in South Africa comes, I think, with self-imposed, I would say, challenges on my end, where I feel I can't fail. I'm no longer doing this for myself only. It's for the betterment of everybody. It's for every African child who would sit in a village somewhere and see me on TV or hear him on radio and talk about my story and the brands that we've launched, and show that, you know what, anything is possible if one just puts the effort and time into it.
Mm. Give us a sense of your revenue model. How do you arrive at pricing of your different beers and ciders?
So our revenue model, we've got 2 streams, actually 3 streams. So I've got the normal running of the business, which is around training and consulting, where most of our clients will go through that. So all our clients will have to first consult, develop the recipe, then we'll offer the training to make sure they understand the brewing process. Because for me, I'm quite big on obviously different people as they embark in this industry. You need to be able to talk about the process. You need to know how beer is made. You need to know what goes into it. You can't just always say, no, Apiwe makes it for me, therefore I don't know how it's made. So I usually push all my clients to go through the training process. Then there's the contract manufacturing, so that we cost based on obviously on raw materials used, what target alcohol one wants, what flavors, what so we develop the recipe and cost it as per that. And then the other one is around obviously the brand Tolokazi beer, which we sell to retail. So that has its own selling model, where we then look at obviously the inputs to that. So it's not only the brewing, but there's also the cost of storage, the cost of distribution, there's a cost of the labels, the cost of the boxes that we all have to put into the overall costing.
Now, give us a sense of who is your typical customer?
Yes, interestingly, when you talk of a typical craft beer drinker, whatever your definition of craft beer is, because there's different definitions of what is craft beer, they would only typically tell you it's a white male with a beard that stays in some suburb and works in some high-end office. For me, with this brand, I wanted to change the narrative. I wanted to push that boundary and say, no, but that is not the only person who should be drinking craft beer. A beer, actually, bottom line, beer is beer, whether you call it craft or not. And with this brand, I wanted to push those boundaries and say any person who feels they can appreciate this brand and its quality and its taste is my target market. So I am at the moment selling in places where your typical craft beer brands will not normally be found, like in the townships, in your Chisanyamas. That's kind of like my, if you want to call it, target market. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not exclusively in those markets. I actually make my product appeal to a wide range of people. So what I've found is, interestingly for me, it is achieving what I wanted to do, which is a crossover beer brand in the country, where as a craft beer brand, it appeals to both white and black people of all, wherever they're coming from. And that at the moment is, and obviously it's ever changing. For me, it's quite interesting that I mean, for example, I once delivered an order in the squatter camps, and the person I was with is like, no, but this is not the target market, don't take pictures. I'm like, you know what, if this person feels that this brand talks to them and they feel they can afford it, because price wise we are a bit more expensive, but for whatever reason, if that person feels this is a brand for them, I can't say no, you're not my target market. You are my target market if you because you appreciate the product, you appreciate the taste, you want to be part of it, and that's my target market.
Now, what are the current trends in your industry?
Yeah, in South Africa, I think Africa as a continent, we follow a lot of the American trends when it comes to the craft beer industry, and somehow the European trends, but I think more US trends. So the current trends at the moment are moving to, a lot of people moving towards canning, which is still a new thing in the I'll say the black market, because a lot of people still feel the beer has to be in a glass bottle. But we slowly seeing that change happening, coming, I think started in Cape Town and now up in Joburg and spreading across the country. That's one of the big trends. There's also trends on the flavors, where there was a point, I think every craft brewery in the country, I think in the continent as a whole, everybody wanted to have an IPA, either an American Pale Ale or India Pale Ale, and that's what was defined as craft. And what we're seeing now is that there's a trend towards making beers that are accessible, drinkable, enjoyable by a wide palette. and still call it craft. So you don't have to be craft, you don't have to be extreme. You can still be craft, being making a product that is accessible to every single other person. And the other interesting trend for me is the use of the African ingredients. It's something that at Tolokazi, as a brewer myself, I advocate for that we in Africa, we need to have our unique beer taste, that when other people come from other countries into the continent, they need to leave having tasted our own uniqueness. And I'm seeing that trend spreading not only in South Africa, but in the guys in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Kenya. Everybody's now kind of all spreading and making unique African beers. And that is also now, I mean, I know brewers in US who are now all wanting to follow the trends of trying to be unique by using African ingredients, which is, for me, I think, a very interesting trend.
How competitive is the beer industry, and who are your competitors?
The industry is very competitive. What I normally tell also my clients is that there's competition, but there is also sticking in your lane, knowing where you're knowing your lane and sticking to it, knowing where you stand, knowing your corner, and grow within your corner instead of wanting to compete with the giants. Especially when you're still very young. As you know, across the continent, we have breweries who have been around for 100+ years, who have, I mean, they own the land, they build the breweries on, they own the equipment, they own distribution, they own everything. So for you to come in as a Apiwe, as a Tolokazi, who's like less than 5 years old, and hope and think that you're going to come in and compete with such giants in the space of a year, I mean, you just are going to be depressed, and especially if you don't have the money. If you have the funds, maybe it's possible. So for me, I don't call it the small breweries. What I tell the guys that we're not competing with each other at this point in time, because a brewery in Nigeria, for an example, and a brewery in Kenya and a brewery in South Africa, we all targeted different markets. A brewery in Cape Town and a brewery in Johannesburg, we're probably never going to reach the same consumer. Therefore, we are not competing with each other. We are all growing the beer as a category. We are all introducing different consumers to craft beer. If it happens that in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the likes of AB Heineken, you are at the same level as them, then you can start competing with them on price, because our biggest issue at the moment is on price, where you can never sell, you can't at the moment in South Africa sell a beer at the same price due to a lot of different reasons, economies of scale, the fact that we buy ingredients from the big breweries and. So to then try and think you're competing with them, personally, I feel is just a recipe for headaches, whereas you can just continue growing your brand and slowly growing it up until you get to that level where you can actually compete with the big giants.
Okay. Now, what do you see, Apiwe, as the current biggest challenges, economic challenges in South Africa?
The biggest challenges in South Africa at the moment, I think, obviously COVID being the biggest, headache, nightmare, and us coming out of the various alcohol bans is going to take a long time. We've had a lot of breweries that have had to close down due to the lockdowns. I mean, personally, my plant, I always tell people that it was by the grace of God that we are still here. Each day has been, it's been very tough. It's been a very stressful time where each day you're just trying to survive. And I think those economic challenges are something that will continue for a while. I think probably till close to spring or summer later this year. And I think the challenges that are linked to that, all the other economic challenges linked to that, obviously unemployment, everything going up, not having access to raw materials, everything else just kind of feeds onto that and creates a bigger problem than yeah.
So what next for Brewsters Craft, Tolokazi? What's next for this company?
What is next? I think for me, the immediate next is as much as we talk of the alcohol bans and cover it as something that is in the past, we still feeling its presence. For me, key now is obviously surviving the next few months and hopefully still be standing. Things are very difficult. I won't lie to you. We're still trying to get through it. And I think once we are through it, I do believe that there is a better tomorrow on the other side. And as such, for me, the focus is on growing the Tolokazi brand, not only in South Africa. The plans are to grow the brand in the continent and long term to grow the brand globally too. Because for me, the brand was about showcasing to the world what we have, what we can do in Africa. Because I remember when I was talking to my designer about the logo of Tolokazi beer, I was like, I wanted something that is world-class African, something that I can take to the streets of New York and say, this is made in South Africa. And people are like, what? South Africa, are you for real? And I'm like, yeah, it's made in South Africa. It's that quality. And obviously the product, the quality, intrinsics of the product itself. So for me, it's something I really want to do, that, we need to, as Africans, start, I know we're doing it, but we need to shout more and showcase more what we can do, and that we can actually do better than some other people out there. And for me, I really want to take this brand to the world and show the world what we have in South Africa and Africa.